Welcome to 52 Miniatures. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make flowing water for something like a diorama or terrain. In my case, it's going to be a sewage pipe that sort of spews out toxic fluids into a little lake. But I'm also going to give you some pointers on maybe how to do it if you want a waterfall or some other type of water feature. So a water feature is usually pretty cool. I mean, if you're building a diorama of some sorts, or even terrain to go on a table, it might be a fountain, stuff like that. It's just one of those things that adds a little bit of extra sparkle to your entire existence. In my case, I built this little diorama for this little car. And it's supposed to be sort of an apocalyptic future. Everything's, not well. And I built this little mountain, and I wanted this sort of little water feature behind it with a sewage pipe that's spewing out toxic fluids into a little lake. Now, for this water feature, there's mainly three main ingredients. One is something called UV resin, which this is made by Green Stuff World. It's basically a resin that you cure using UV light. So you have a small torch when you finish pouring, and the UV light from the torch will cure the resin. The second thing is something called splash gel, also from Green Stuff World, which is a splash gel water effect. And finally, also, Mod Podge would probably be what most of you recognize, glossy Mod Podge. I've been using the same thing, but from just a Swedish brand, and this is called Decoupage Varnish Glue Glossy. You could also use sort of Liquitex Gloss Medium. What you want is something that just when it hardens becomes totally clear and glossy. Gloss Mod Podge would be sort of my general go-to thing. Throughout this video, I'll be showing you exactly how this was made, but I'm going to give you sort of different pointers in different directions of alternative ways of doing what I did, to give you as many sort of tools and possibilities as possible, using the same procedure and tools. There's a lot of tools. Now, when working with water, it's a little bit tricky because basically resin and the things we use for water effects, they're clear and see-through. Water's clear and see-through. Like, put water in a glass and what you see is the glass, not the water, really, kind of a thing. The same thing goes for dioramas. In my case, I'm mainly later on going to be talking about how to make the flowing water. But if you're into building a diorama, these are just some things that you should maybe consider, because what you can actually see of the water in this diorama is the reflections of light on the glossy surface. You can't really see how deep it is. So what we got to work with is reflections, which is part of what I'll be showing you. But it's nice to have a think of when you're going to do something like this, is flat surfaces is usually pretty boring. You want reflections, you want things that are happening, either flowing water, ripples, waves, this kind of stuff, because otherwise the water effect itself will be really difficult to perceive. Another thing that I won't really be getting into in this video, but that you can check out other videos, of other people who've done it, is not doing like what I've done, which is, in my case, you can only see the pond here, you can only see the top of the water. But it's pretty common in other water features that you have sort of a cut of the side of the water, so you actually can see into the side of the water. That means you have to, do some other sort of advanced stuff, which I might show in another video. But now let's go into the flowing, the goo, the, toxic waste or waterfall. So the first thing was to make the actual flowing water that's coming out of my sewage pipe. I used something called splash gel water effect. I dolloped out on a piece of clear plastic. Now, the reason I'm making several of these is this water splash gel effect, it has quite some drying time. Like we're looking at a couple of hours or something like that. And the less you use, the faster it'll dry, obviously. And the more you use, if you use a lot, it can like take overnight to dry. So instead of like making one of these and maybe accidentally ruining it and then having to do it again, it's not really great. Secondly, this will give me an option to try, I'll take the best one out of 3 and I can save the other ones for later on. But anyway, I dollop out some of this and I try and shape it in, the shape of water flowing out of a pipe. This water effect, it comes out, it's white in here, and when it dries, it becomes clear. To a certain point, I realized that when using a lot of it, it doesn't ever really become clear. But the thing with this as well is that at first when you because I try to do these shapes, and flowing water. And the thing when this dries, it somehow it shapes itself a little bit so that it really does kind of look like water. It's, I can't really say what it is, but it doesn't dry exactly the way you will shape it. It'll shrink a little bit. It'll sort of warp and twist. I'm talking on a very minute level, and the result is really water-like. But what I did is I put these out, and after 1 hour, I actually timed this. After 1 hour, I gently rolled them off the plastic, because I didn't want, like, if this completely hardens on the plastic, one side will be flat and the other will have sort of a watery kind of texture. And I wanted that watery kind of texture on both sides, or on all sides. It's round-ish on all sides. Just, when they were loose from the plastic, I left them on the side to dry completely. I also just wanted to see what happened if I sort of gave one of them a bit of color. And I have these dyes for resins. I think you could probably use inks as well. But here's another thing when making water features. Whatever you do, from start A to start B, because basically you will have a finished diorama, whatever it is, that you've been working quite a bit on. And this is the last step. Like if you built your diorama and you want it to be matte varnished, you do that before you start doing the resins, because you don't want to sort of matte varnish your water later on. Like your diorama should be finished and then you move on to water. And thus, test on something else before you ruin your diorama. Like if you're going to do a resin pour, try doing a small one in something else, just to see that the resin will actually harden, that there's nothing wrong with the product. If you want to color your resins with inks or with dyes or whatever it is you're using, try that first in another container to see that it works. Every single step, try it first outside of your diorama, check that it works, and then apply it to your diorama. Even if you're watching like a video or a tutorial or something like that, just because it works for that person, just because this works for me is not, it's not 100% sure. Well, mine's pretty bulletproof because I kind of don't see why sort of UV resin wouldn't harden. But even then, what if you got a faulty batch of something? There could be anything going on, and you don't want to ruin all that work you put into your first, the original build. So always test every single step. That being said, I tested some of this dye for resins in some of this splash gel just to see what it looks like when it gets a bit of color in there. I didn't actually end up using it. But I just wanted to see what it looked like when it was, green. Now, once these, water thingies had dried, I was pretty stoked because it was like, okay, I'm done, kind of a thing. And so I just checked the 3 different ones just to see which one I liked the best, and then made sure the one I liked, because basically what I want is it's flowing out through the pipe. So there should be more water at the top, maybe even a little bit of a curve, and then, falling downwards. So I picked the one I thought looked the best, and I took a minute piece, minute amount of super glue just to attach it. Now, the thing with super glue is this kind of stuff can sometimes cloud plastic. Like, if you were ever like 7 years old and you built like a scale model airplane, and you put ages into painting all that silver on there, and it was really nice, and the flaky decals and that, and then the last bit was you were going to sort of put the glass in the cockpit and you glued it in place, and everything just fogged up. I used super glue just to quickly attach it in place, but I tried to use it as little as possible to sort of reduce the risk of clouding. So just have that in mind. Just don't, when working with your water feature, be delicate with the super glue. Now, with resin, or any chemical really that you use, and we kind of use a lot of chemicals in our hobby, just check out the security, safety kind of stuff. When you're using resin especially, you want to protect your skin, you want to protect your eyes, and protect your lungs, basically, when you cure it. So proper ventilation, protection gloves that aren't made out of latex. You can read up on what you need. Just Google UV resin safety, something like that. And breathing protection, if you're not maybe doing it outside or something. And even if you're doing it inside, you want to ensure sort of doing it in proper ventilated spaces. I did everything actually under the fan in the kitchen, and I haven't got just one of those fans with a carbon type filter. It's actually a ventilation that goes straight out, and it sucks like absolute crazy. So when I started, it's like, so that worked out really well. But otherwise, just go outdoors or whatever. Anyway, I actually used this stuff, which is fluorescent resin. Sort of a very toxic waste kind of a color, but when you use your UV light on it, it actually sort of kind of glow in the dark kind of a thing. I wasn't actually after that effect all that much. I was after mainly the color it's got when you just look at it with normal eyes and not sort of superhero UV vision. So I just dolloped on a little bit up top, just to make sure everything's really well stuck in place, and also just to get that sort of feel that there's actually stuff coming out of the pipe and flowing down. Now, here's a bit of a watershed moment in water feature creation. The thing is, with this splash gel effect that we've done, the flowing water, it's really, really nice. I really like it. And one of the reasons is that when it hardens, by the way, it doesn't actually harden and become hard, it's kind of soft, but when it hardens, there's a lot of small edges and surfaces that, as I was saying before, reflect light. That's why it looks like sort of water flowing, because, And when you use something like, because what I did is I took resin, the green one, because I wanted the green color, and brushed with a brush on top of it and poured some in the bottom. What happens is you're covering up all those small edges with something that is, thicker, and when it hardens, becomes smoother. And you lose some of those reflections. So before I had the resin on, there was, it was more sort of water-like, like a stream pouring out. And when I used the resin on top of it and hardened that, it was more sort of a goo. And so here's a choice, in how you want your water effect to be perceived. After that, I used some normal UV resin in the bottom of the pond, or whatever you want to call it, just to get some volume up, Because here's also, like I was talking about before, is you've got the reflection thing, but there's also, you could have things happening in the water to make it look more like water. One thing is adding different colors and different pigments into the water. But I don't actually want to do that all the way down at the bottom, because I don't want to cover up the details that I've been painting on the bottom of the pond. Then I mixed in some green, I think it was, dye for resins. Once more, you could try with different inks, just test it first before you use it on your diorama. Filled up again with just normal UV resin, and then dripped in the one with the dye in it, sort of moving it around a little bit so that it looks like the water that's being poured down, you know, that sort of green and gooey, that sort of streaks out. And then I also poured in a little bit of the green UV resin in there and streaked it out with a toothpick, just, you know, to get this sort of toxic ooze flowing out into the unoozy water. Then I hardened it once more and finally filled up with regular UV resin, just to get the level of the water up to where I want it. Here's the thing with these, like what's cool with resins is that you can do it layer by layer by layer, and you can add different colors and different things in every layer, making all these different effects depending on what's going on where in the water. You don't have to just pour it all at the same time. You can do a little bit at a time, adding different colors, adding different strokes, and you can just do so much. This is basically a very simple version, but you could expand this, you know, very much. Now, I've been using UV resin just because it's very fast. But I mean, basically, apart from quite a bit of testing, I must admit, but just for this little pond, you know, I probably used half a bottle of this UV resin. And so if you're looking at doing a larger water feature, then you're probably looking at getting some other type of resin that maybe doesn't, you know, UV harden. Maybe it's your regular sort of casting resin. Just want to mention that. Also, when working with resins, something you can sort of try and pay attention to is air bubbles. Basically, if you pour resin, I didn't really do this, I just poured it like this. If you're pouring larger amounts of resin, you know, what you want to do is you basically want to pour that onto something that then pours into, you know, and then not like go in with the fork and go like this, because you get quite a lot of bubbles in there and you don't want bubbles. You also can probably, you know, there's lots of ways of not getting bubbles. I don't know them, but it might be worth looking up, especially if you're not using sort of UV resin, but you're using sort of more the regular kind. What I did is I just tried to hit it on the sides like this to see if the bubbles would sort of slowly go up. And then I could also just wait for a while, let it set for a little while and see if those bubbles just sort of bubbled up to the surface before I hardened it. So now basically we've got the flowing water, we've got the lake with the oozy stuff coming out, but we've got that flat surface. It's just really, it's like, you know, you walk into a forest and there's this little lake and there's not a breeze, there's nothing, it's just this flat surface. Only there's no fun sort of reflection and stuff from the sky and the clouds and everything, because you're working on something that's tiny, you know. So you want stuff happening in the water. And this is where the Mod Podge, the glossy Mod Podge comes in, or Liquitex gloss medium, or, you know, the stuff that I've been using, which is, you know, the same stuff. And there's lots of ways to do this. I tried it first, you know, I wanted sort of a ring, because, you know, the water should be flowing down and creating sort of ripples. Just gooed some out and a bit here and there. Realized when it had dried that I just didn't use enough. You can go pretty heavy with this stuff without it sort of, because it shrinks quite a lot. And so afterwards I went in with a lot more and trying to do sort of waves flowing out from the center of where this thing had fallen down, all the goo. I also used a little bit of this splash gel just where it hits the water, you know, to get sort of a bit of a splashy effect. Like with the Mod Podge kind of a thing, that's, you know, you could be working that a lot if you would want to. One way, if you've got an airbrush to do sort of waves, is to actually glue lots of this on there and gently, with a very low PSI, get sort of waves from when you blow your airbrush, you know. You can also build it up in layers. You can first say, like I did, just exaggerate it with the round rings on the pond, and then you can do another layer on top of that, and you can sort of try and shape that layer, and then you can do it again and shape that layer, and eventually you'll have sort of waves. If you want, you can mix in some white paint into it, just a little bit, to add on top, you know, on the absolute top of the waves, so that you get that sort of white stuff. There's also other type of effects, not like this splash gel, but sort of wave crest water effects that you could try. But you really can go crazy with the Mod Podge and experiment if you like. And that was pretty much it for my little water feature. It's very simple and it looks great. And as I said, there's lots of different ways of doing it. If you like the green, you know, gooey sort of nuclear, well, go for that. If you don't like the green, don't do the green. If you want more sort of a sparkly, you know, yeah. But what if you wanted a waterfall? Well, I tried some different things. At first I thought, you know, how thick can I make this gel? So I used a ton of it and put it on the edge of the phone container and on some baking tray paper, just to make sure I could get it loose once it hardened. And then I waited for it to dry. And I waited and I waited. And then I waited a little bit, and then I waited some more, and then I went to bed and woke up in the morning, and then I waited. I actually didn't time how long this took, but it took a very long time, and it didn't really clear. You can see, you know, it's cloudy. So I think if you want to use a lot of this splash gel, you should do it sort of layer by layer by layer for it to be able to clear. I built this little fake just to put it on something. This excellent little piece of work here, this cardboard diorama, just to put it on something, just to be able to look at it. So then I thought, you know, okay, this isn't really what, you know, it could be a frozen waterfall, I guess, but what if you don't want a frozen waterfall? So I cut out a piece of plastic. I think this specifically was from a packet of mixing balls from Army Painter. But you see what I mean. It's the kind of plastic that you get just from buying something at a game store. I cut out a piece. In this case, I cut something that went, you know, at a curve like this, as it's really sort of water flowing out. In theory, you don't really have to do that. You could just have a straight piece of plastic, depending on what your feature looks like, you know. And then I used a lighter, and, you know, just be careful not to put fire to the plastic. You know, okay, let's start. If you're a young viewer, please go get your parent and you know, tell them that this guy on YouTube is telling me to put fire to plastic. Should I do it? And they'll say like, no. And they can watch with you and, you know, help out. If you're an older viewer, but you just are out of control and likes to put fire to stuff, you know, please don't. If you're just my regular kind of viewer, then just don't burn your fingers, okay? Now, with a lighter, you can, you know, if you burn it too much, it'll actually catch fire. But if you don't burn it too much, it just becomes soft, and you can shape the plastic. And you can shape the plastic in sort of roughly the shape of flowing water. Once you've done that, it'll be sort of covered a little bit in soot, which it is very easy to clean off using just some water with a little bit of dishwasher detergent or something like that, or even just water. And so I glued that on my lovely diorama here, and once more used the splash gel to sort of create the texture of falling water on top of the plastic. I did a thin layer at first, and then I went back and did another one just to make sure that I was keeping this, giving it the possibility to clear as much as possible. On the second layer, I even added some, I mixed in some blue and some green, this dye for resins, just to show you what it could look like if you add a bit of color to the water. And, you get a really nice sort of, I'm not going to say aggressive, but, it looks like the water's flowing pretty fast. And this is, in a way here, you're sculpting the water. So it's kind of up to you what this, the waterfall will look like. And you might need to try it a few times, before everything turns out great. But what you can also do is think in reverse. Because I did another one, and I put the splash gel on the back. So not on the front where you would sort of normally think that, the water's flowing out and so all the effects should be on the front. I put it on the back. And what that does is, once more, if we go back into I was talking about reflections of light. What that does is you get this watery texture, but it's flat towards the plastic. And so the light can reflect on that. And you get this really gorgeous fantasy kind of style waterfall. Like, imagine if you're in, you're in Rivendell, surrounded by all these lovely elven waterfalls, and everything, like the birds are like, everything's fantastic. That kind of a waterfall. It's beautiful. You're left with a flat surface, facing towards you. But that can be fixed. You can add some splash gel just up the top where the water's flowing over. You can add some splash gel just here and there. You can try with the glossy Mod Podge to create some different textures on there. But as a flowing water effect, this is marvelous. And then obviously, depending on what you're doing, you can add the resin to create the bigger flow of water and whatever it splashes into, and then you can revert to this thing, because it's basically the same procedure. And there we are. One very specific sort of nuclear waste flowing out of tube way of making a water effect, and some inspiration for waterfalls and stuff like that. All pretty much based around this splash gel water effect that I can highly recommend, because it, used rightly, it seems to turn out great. And UV resin, of course, or, for larger things, some other sort of type of resin. And remember the safety, and, don't burn down your house, because, it's just really stupid to burn down your house. I hope you liked this video, and thanks to everyone who sort of subscribes. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe and like and share and all these things. Big thanks to my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to support me, being able to keep on doing this better and better and more, then please support me on Patreon. And now go do some water effects. Bye.